so now we're going to finish Chapter 1, Section A, and we're going to still work on these two objectives. All right, so let's just go ahead. We already talked about this in the last video, so let's just go ahead and get started on the problem so that we can finish this section. All right, so for the first one, the sum of P and the square of Q. So now, before we were given an expression, we had to write it in words. Now we're given it in words, and we have to translate it into an expression. So when we look, we're going to look for key terms. So we're going to look and see what operation is being performed here. So when it says the sum, I know that I'm going to then be adding some things together. So I know I'm going to add a couple things together. So it says the sum of P and the square of Q. So I know these are the two things I'm going to be adding together. So there's nothing being done to P, so I can just write P plus. And then it's the sum of P and the square of Q. So what does it mean to square something? That means we need to raise it to the second power. So it's going to be Q squared. So the sum of P and the square of Q is going to be P plus Q squared. If it said the square root of Q, then that's where we will take the square root of Q. So, but when it just says the square, we're going to strictly be looking at P squared. All right, now for B, same thing. We want to identify any key term. So what operation is being performed? So it says the square, so that's one of them. So the square of the sum of P and Q. So if you see the difference here is this one says the sum of P and the square of Q. This says the square of the sum of P and Q. So that means we need to first add P and Q together, and then whatever that was equal to, we are squaring it because it says the square of the sum. So you see here it says the sum of the P and the square of Q. So that tells us that our addition is going to be done after the square of Q. Here it says the square of the sum of P and Q. So that means we need to write it in this form. And then our last one for C. So then it says B less than double A. So once I say B less than, that's my operation that's being performed. So I know I can do minus B because whenever we see less than, B less than means we're subtracting that from something in front of it. And then it goes on to say double A. So what does double A? How do we represent doubling something? Well, that means multiplying it by 2. So we can then say 2 times A minus B. We're not squaring it because when we square something, we're not doubling it. So it's double A, so that means 2 times A. All right, now let's move on to the last part of section 1. All right, now the last part of this section 1 is algebraic equations. So in an algebraic equation is a statement that two algebraic expressions are equal. So now remember, this is what we're saying. This is an equal sign now, so it includes an equal sign. All right, now all we're going to do with this is I'm going to give you an equation and we're going to describe it in words. All right, so it's very similar to what we were doing, except for now we must say equal to. All right, so for the first one, it says D is equal to C times T. So we can just say D is equal to, and you can say C times T, or I'm just going to say D is equal to the product of C and T. I'm just going to use a little bit different of a words, but if you said D is equal to C times D, that's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm just going to say the product just to give it a little bit different of a way of saying it, a more technical way of saying it. All right, now for this next one, we're going to say A is equal to, so it's an equation. And now we need to describe this. So we can't just say B divided by 2. We should then make sure that we are saying that we need to add B and C first. So that means I'm going to say is equal to half, because when we divide by 2, we're taking half of something. So I'm going to say A is equal to half of the sum of B and C, because this is telling me that we need to add B and C, and then we're taking half of it. You can also say A is equal to the sum of B and C divided by 2. That will work as well if you wanted to say that instead. A is equal to the sum of B and C divided by 2. That one will work as well. So for these answers, there's not really one specific way that you have to answer these. It's really just up to your preference. And as long as if you're accurately describing what's going on, you would get it correct. All right, I was mistaken. There's one more problem that we need to do, and this is the last one for this section before we move on to section B. So it says, write as an equation. S is equal to the sum of A and the product of G and T. So we need to go ahead and rewrite this. So first I see S is equal to, so that means I can rewrite it as S is equal to. And then it says the sum, so that's my operation. I know I'm going to be adding together. So the sum of A and the product, there's another operation of G and T. So that means I'm adding A plus, and then the product of G and T. So it will be A plus G times T. All right, and that will then be our final answer for this equation. All right, that's going to be it for this video. I'm going to go ahead and create a new one for the next section.